What is going on, gun fighters? Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, use of force, guns, ammo, personal protection, home defense, all manner of things, the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world, first-hand experience. Now, this is an episode hopefully you'll find interesting if you are a seasoned gun person, because hopefully there's people in your lives that are not, that you're trying to get into guns. And don't just try and push on them the guns that you think they should have, or the cool, hot, new gun, but a gun that's actually going to serve them well if they're not a gun person. So whether you're a seasoned gun owner or a new gun owner. So if you know somebody that's getting into guns or wants a gun but is probably not going to go to the range every weekend, this might be a show to share with them. With that being said, I'm going to do a quick abbreviated version of the bio to establish some bona fides with new listeners. First and foremost, I am a Christian, a servant of God, and a follower of Jesus Christ. God is number one in everything. He is preeminent. And this podcast is no different. I don't want to apologize for that. Also, He's blessed me to be a professional gunfighter most of my adult life in one way or another. U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran. Served in wartime. After my combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. Also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also law enforcement, worked LAPD, regular assignments, more specialized assignments, worked with the feds, FBI certified firearms instructor. I've also been a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency I won't specify. State rifle and pistol champion a few times over in a few different locations, a few different years. There's more, but that's probably enough to establish for this episode. And not because I'm better than anybody else, and I don't think that I survived when any other good men did not. I just think that God chose to save me and have mercy on me and has a purpose for me. And part of that is sharing the talents and gifts He's given me to help others. So that's what I'm trying to do here today. So hopefully you guys appreciate that, and hopefully I can actually use the talents and skills that God's given me. One of those being oratory, being able to speak and articulate a point that I'm trying to make. And I'll try and do that here today to help, not myself, right? I do this podcast to help you guys, and hopefully today to help some newer shooters. That's one of the things that I really like. I've been a professional firearms instructor a long time, and you might think that I like teaching a, one-handed backflip while shooting, force on force, going up and down staircase, clearing, throwing flashbang type classes. And I'm not going to say I don't enjoy those, but what I really enjoy are first-time shooter classes, teaching little kids the first time they've ever held a gun. Maybe their parents want them to know about guns, but they don't know a lot about guns, and I get to teach them. That is an honor and a privilege. I am blessed to be able to do that. That's my favorite kind of class to teach. With that being said, today's episode, I heard this. I was trying to catch up and stay abreast of the industry this weekend. Got quite a bit of driving in and listening to trying to find different channels I don't normally listen to. And I heard a couple people say this, and they said it as in like they didn't invent it. They said it as if it was a term that was known. So I don't know who to give credit to, but I get the concept. As soon as I said it, I kind of realized what they were talking about. So I did not come up with this term. Fire extinguisher gun. A fire extinguisher gun, meaning the way I'm going to use it is break glass in case of emergency. Now, many of us hopefully have fire extinguishers. However, you probably don't train with your fire extinguisher all the time. Unless you're like a volunteer firefighter, you probably know the basics. Start at the base of the fire, use this type of fire extinguisher for this type of fire, and not this one for this one. Don't use a water extinguisher on electrical fire. You probably know the basics, but you're probably not training all the time, getting inert fire extinguishers and, practicing your dry fire with your fire extinguisher, but you have one in case of an emergency. It needs to be basic. It needs to be simple. You need to maybe have it in case something bad happens, but you're not a firefighter. You're not into firefighting. You don't live and breathe that life. You don't read, Firefighter magazine. You don't keep abreast on this is the best nozzle for 2024 that really increases the effectiveness of your fire extinguisher by 10%. Like, you get what I'm saying. You don't care. You want a fire extinguisher in case of emergency. If we apply that to guns, you want a gun in case of an emergency, or you want to get a gun if you're a seasoned, gunfighter. You want to get a gun for somebody that's not a gun person, a sister, an aunt, somebody that's got a restraining order, somebody that, they live on a farm and they're far away from help, and they maybe just want something around the homestead. Like, they've had a problem with coyotes, they've had a problem with raccoons, and they want a gun, but they're not a gun person. They're gonna go out and shoot it, and you're gonna help them zero it, and they're gonna have it. And if there's, a raccoon literally eating their chickens, then they'll take care of the raccoon. But they're not gonna be out there again doing, combat roles in their plate carrier, training with their gun. That's just not them. They want one in case of an emergency. In case of some people, hopefully they train a little bit, but it might be sitting in the corner for a year, and they may never touch it. But, the second they look outside and there's a coyote in the front yard, then they're going to use it. They live out in the country, or they live in a city and they've experienced periods of civil unrest in the past, I don't know, let's say 3 or 4 years, because that's, anybody remember George Floyd? I mean, you live in a big metropolitan area. What was that? Minneapolis, that whole area. But it trickled out into a lot of other cities. So I've had to live through civil unrest, both here, CONUS, both here in the U.S. and abroad. That's a real thing. So maybe they're not going to be a gun person, they're not going to train. You know that they probably should, and maybe they know they should, but they're honest enough with themselves to just know that they're not going to. They're busy with PTA meetings and golf or whatever people do, eating pizza. I don't know what normal people do. I'm not real normal, but you get the idea. But they want a gun in case something happens, and they're not going to never train with it, but they're not going to be out there again every weekend training with it. So they want it in case of emergency. Break glass in case of emergency. Simple to use, simple to operate. That's what we're talking about here. Fire extinguisher guns. So with that, I'm going to talk about mostly what I think makes some good fire extinguisher guns. And I might delve into a little bit about what is not, because there's a lot of common guns I think that are not at all good fire extinguisher guns, but people often think about as fire extinguisher guns. So I may go into that, but obviously it can't be an exhaustive list. The list of what I would consider fire extinguisher guns is going to be pretty short. Okay, let's start at the bottom of the barrel. And I just did a whole episode on these kind of guns, but single shot 22. And you might think that's ridiculous. Calm down. Let me explain before you fly off the handle. If you're a tactical operator and you got your Glock 19X with your red dot and your Scar 17, like, cool. I like tactical guns too, but what's the use of this? Again, for that person that has a small farm, a small homestead out in the country, they don't want it for defense. There are people, believe it or not, that will not take a human life. They're just not going to do it, no matter what it costs them. If it costs them the use of their own body, right? If it costs them their very life, they just don't have it in them to take a human life. Not to be sexist, but a lot of females are like this. Some males are like this. If that's the kind of person that you are or that you're dealing with, don't kid yourself. All right? And don't kid yourself if you're dealing with somebody else. Don't be giving them, the coolest tactical gun if you just know they're not going to do that. They're just not going to take a human life. Taking a human life is a heavy, weighty matter, and it's a hard thing to do. Anybody that gives you the bravado of, I'll just shoot them or this or that, I probably will write off everything I say after that, because people that actually have done that don't talk like that. It's a heavy, weighty thing, unless you're a psychopath, which hopefully you're not a psychopath listening to this podcast. It's a weighty thing, and some people just aren't going to do that. Now, they're not in the mental state to do that. That's just not. Maybe they're a Quaker. I'm not here to judge them for that, but some people just aren't that. If they want a gun for around the homestead, if they want a gun for real common household pests that you might encounter, anywhere from the East Coast to the out west, prairie dogs, rock chucks, woodchucks, marmots, anything like that that's going to eat crops, tear up the ground. So even rabbits. I mean, rabbits, getting into the garden is like a kind of a classic cliche. But, rabbit in the garden, a fox in the hen house, another cliche. They want to take care of a fox in the hen house. They want to take care of a raccoon that keeps getting in the trash no matter what they do. They want to take care of the odd possum. They want to take care of those kind of things. Maybe a big snake that has gotten in the area. You get the idea. Just for stuff like that. They're not going to use it for a tactical purpose. They just want a good, simple to use, simple to operate, utilitarian gun. Single shot 22. Either a break open, that'd be my number one recommendation, but oddly they're not as common as a bolt action single shot. But if you can find like one of the old H&R handy rifle break open single shot 22s, the ammunition's cheap, it's easy, it's not intimidating, it's not hard to use. Get one, I would say just get one with iron sights and leave it at that. For the person that this is for, the scope, if you get one with a scope and it has a scope and they like the scope, that's fine. A simple fixed 4 or something is fine, but it's just more complex, probably not needed. They're probably not trying to push themselves with marksmanship. They're probably trying to shoot a fox that's 10, 15 yards away, when they come out the back door and it's in the hen house, literally. So, or trying to get into the hen house, trying to get into that, chicken wire. So, just a simple break open single shot 22. If you can't get that, get a bolt action single shot 22. And I just did a whole episode on single shot 22s. Didn't plan this out, but you might look that up if you want a specific model. If you're like, yes, this makes sense for my Aunt Susie who lives on 40 acres in the Midwest, and she's been complaining about coyotes or fox or something, and I want to get her something. There are several models. There are, probably find them at Walmart if you live in a place where Walmart sells guns. If you don't, you might consider moving to another part of the country. But anyway, a single shot 22. Savage makes some good ones. Keystone makes some good ones. And there are a lot of good older ones too. If they're just into the classic, they kind of want something to, just a cool little old gun to hang above the mantle, an old Remington, an old Winchester to hang above the fireplace. Single shot 22. But not to beat a dead horse, but the ammunition's easily available, affordable. So there you go, single shot 22. Now, if there's stuff that they may want a little bit more firepower for, or they may use it for defense, either against people or something bigger, but mostly just for that same kind of defense, get a single shot shotgun. I would say in all but like the very northern states of Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, get a single shot 20 gauge. Again, this is not for a gun person. I generally prefer a 12 gauge, but for somebody that's not going to shoot a lot and train a lot, the 20 gauge will do fine. The 20 gauge with assorted ammunition will kill just about anything. Now, I said if you live in Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, get the 12 because you might want a good Bernanke slug if you're going against a grizzly bear, but it's probably not the gun that you want. So, in all but that small little pocket of the country, Alaska, like coastal Alaska, right? And you'd be surprised. I lived in Alaska. I lived in coastal, thick population density brown bear country. I lived there in Alaska. A lot of those people really aren't gun people. You'd think that everybody in Alaska is packing heat, but they're not. A lot of liberals up there, and not that liberals can't own guns, they certainly can, but just a lot of people up there just aren't gun people. You'd be surprised, but they're not. So, for that kind of thing. Single shot, and again, anywhere but that little pocket, Alaska, Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, 20 gauge. It will still do fine. If they got a fox, if they got a coyote, if they got a coon, whatever the normal household pests are, it will do fine. If they're not going to shoot it a lot, the ammunition is certainly more than 22 as far as round per round, but they're probably not shooting more than a box a year. And if they live in this same kind of semi-rural environment, they might want to get some food. Like, they're not willing to take a life, but they are willing to put some food on the table from time to time. Like, maybe they get a deer in the garden. That's a real thing. Maybe they get a deer in the garden and they keep a couple of rounds of buckshot, and their shot's going to be 20 yards, literally. And there's a lot of states where if it's your land and your farm, you don't have to have a hunting license to take a deer. So they can supplement their food. they can go from that deer taking food from them to that deer becoming food for them. Meat is not something that should, in my opinion, come wrapped in cellophane from the grocery store. So in that kind of scenario where they might be dealing with, a groundhog, they might be dealing with a deer, they might be dealing with a bear, single shot shotgun. And there are better shotguns than a single shot, but single shots are affordable and they're easy to learn how to use. And you might think pumps are super simple, but they're not. And as somebody that's been an instructor and taught, they're not. Even for cops that supposedly are experts, and most cops are not gunfighters, and most cops, sadly, don't get a lot of shotgun training. You think they're super easy to operate until it's on an empty chamber and it's been 6 months since somebody shot one, and they forget what button releases the pump, and they can't figure out how to get around in the chamber. And if this is not a gun person, they're probably not keeping it with a round in the chamber. So I think the single shot break open is better. And there are the double barrels, but those are generally pretty expensive. So a single shot break open is one of the most utilitarian guns you can get. If it is a home invasion, if it's one person, the single shot is a decent choice. But obviously limited on rate of fire. It's not like you only shoot it once and then you throw it away. It's more of like a single loader. If you're new to guns, think of it as like a single loader. You shoot one round, you break it open, you load another round. Certainly a decent rate of fire compared to something like a Civil War musket, but not as fast as a pump, but much easier to use. You think pumps are easier to use if you're familiar with a shotgun. But for somebody that's not, and they can't find that button to release the pump, or they're a little bit excited, and this happens, right? They're a little bit excited, and they don't work the pump all the way back and forth, and they induce a double feed, and now they've got a malfunctioned gun, and again, they're not a gun person, so they can't clear it. I'm not saying a break open single shot shotgun never malfunctions. Like, it can break. Any mechanical thing can break, but there's really not a lot that goes wrong with those. So any of the break open single shot shotguns. For most people, a 20 gauge, if you want to step up to 12, go ahead. But again, anything from groundhog to a bear, and even a home invasion, right? It's a lot better than nothing. It's a lot better than a baseball bat or whatever people in Europe use for home invasions, right? It's a lot better than that. Break open single shot shotgun. Low barrier to entry as far as cost, as far as training. If you're the person getting this for somebody or you're getting into it, you can have somebody show you how to use it. You can go to the range reasonably, have somebody explain to you bird shot, maybe get some 7.5 shot, maybe get a couple of rounds of buckshot. I wouldn't even mess with slugs, because if you're doing this again to take a deer, do a real close range, because you're probably not into marksmanship if this is you, but still a good practical gun. And even if you decide later that you want something better, you probably aren't going to regret having a break open single shot shotgun. It's a very good utilitarian gun. If you like old school classic stuff, you can find a lot of these older ones kicking around. You can find a lot of newer ones still being made. I'm not going to go into a whole separate thing about quality of build and stuff like that, but just they're very affordable. They're some of the most affordable firearms you can get. Again, a couple of, maybe a box or two of birdshot, practice with one, keep the other. A couple of, probably just one box of buckshot. If you're a prepper and you want to store ammo, fine, but that's probably not the people we're talking about today. Have a box of buckshot, probably two. Practice with one just so you get the idea of it on a piece of cardboard. I would say know the distance that your shotgun can keep most, and by most, the common loading is 9 pellets of double-aught buck. I'd say if you can keep most, and that would be 5 pellets of double-aught buck on that pie plate, that's probably your range for deer or bear in your area. So, and obviously that'll do fine for coyotes and smaller things too. Without making it too complex and talking about different sizes of buckshot, get you a box or two of birdshot and get you a box or two of just the common double-aught buck. It's not even my favorite, but it's the standard. It'll do fine. And if I was picking an all-around buckshot, I probably would just be standard double-aught buck, which is kind of the standard for a reason. So, anyway, those are my thoughts on those single-shot break-open guns. Super utilitarian, super reliable. Well, what's their downside? What's the downside of these guns? The downside is rate of fire, obviously. They're not single shots, again, like you shoot it once and you throw it in a ditch because it's not good anymore, right? It's a single load. So you load it once, you fire it, you got to break it open and load it again, or work the bolt, load one round. They're not crazy slow, again, especially compared to like a musket or, a bow and arrow or something, but they're a lot slower rate of fire than most modern guns. Okay. Now, there's a reason I did not start here. This is where most people start, especially people that are just not into guns. They start with a handgun. Okay, I am not for that. Let me just preface this by saying I love handguns. I mentioned my competition shooting. I have won more handgun competitions by far than anything else. I train more with a handgun than anything else. But I like it because it's hard. I like it because it's a challenge. I've taken more deer with a handgun, honestly, than I can remember. But again, I do that because it's hard, because it's a challenge. I would never advise, if you're trying to put meat on the table, if you have a choice, to pick a handgun. I would never advise for home defense, ever, to pick a handgun. I have a handgun on me right now because it's the gun that I can have on me. That's the reason you have a handgun. You have a handgun because you can carry it on you. Period. It's not better for really anything else. Unless you get into some weird, you have to think up like some scenario, like I'm in Nam and I'm crawling through a tunnel and I got to hold a flashlight in one hand because headlamps weren't invented yet. For that, yeah, a handgun is your weapon because that's what you have, and that you kind of need another hand. But for most other scenarios, a handgun is either a secondary backup tool or it's the gun you have because it's just not practical to do your gardening with an AR-15 on your back, or it's not practical to walk through Walmart, with a Scar 17 slung over your back like a guitar. It's just not practical. So you have a handgun, so you have a gun when you otherwise couldn't have a gun. And this, forgive me if there's that term mansplaining, forgive me if I'm tactical splaining to you, but again, this is for all levels of shooters. So handguns are, a lot of people, because they see them in movies and stuff a lot, and they see somebody in a movie taking out an airplane with a handgun or something. Handguns are inherently harder to shoot. They're inherently, unless you get off the rails into something crazy, less powerful than most other centerfire rifles, shotguns. They're less effective. They're harder to shoot. They're harder to hit a target with. They're good for nothing except for you can carry them on you. That said, I love handguns, but I didn't start there for a reason. Okay, with that caveat, let's get into handguns. And this is going to be a long episode. I thought it was going to be short, but we're already in 22 minutes and some change. So let's talk about handguns. My first pick for this is a revolver, and not the one that usually gets pushed on the cliche of the woman that walks into the store. Not a little tiny Smith & Wesson J-frame. And again, I love a Smith & Wesson J-frame. I sometimes carry a very small, lightweight 357 Magnum J-frame. It's an expert's gun. It is not a beginner's gun. I repeat, it is not a beginner's gun. Again, we're not talking about concealed carry here. If you are brand new and you just want a fire extinguisher gun, that's not a concealed carry gun. We're not doing first concealed carry guns here. This episode. If you're brand new to guns and you're not going to train, I don't think you should conceal carry. And you might disagree with that. I think every American has the right to conceal carry, and I think many more should than do, but I don't think you should just grab a gun and start carrying it without any training and without actually practicing with it. And again, handguns require a lot more practice to be proficient. So with that caveat, not the little small J-frame, but a good revolver, a good medium to large frame revolver. One like police officers use in this country for the better part of the 20th century. And why did they use those? Because they're very forgiving, they're very easy to use. Cops are not gunfighters. As somebody that was a cop for a long time, both regular assignments and more specialized assignments, somebody that taught police officers for a long time. Cops are not gunfighters. Cops are administrators. Cops are clerks. Cops are a right arm of the magistrate, to kind of be a tattletale, to tell the magistrate when you've done something wrong, or to go get you when somebody else tells them that they've done something wrong. And get mad at that if you want, but I'm just telling you. Ask any cop, unless they're on a specialty unit like a SWAT team or a active shooter response team or something. Ask them how much time they spend pulling a trigger versus how much time they spend with a pen in their hand or in front of their MDT, in front of their little mobile computer, or at the station writing a report. Ask them how much time they do shooting versus that. It's the vast majority of the time. It's the vast majority of the time. They're doing administrative work. They're administrators that carry a gun just in case. Cops, your average street cop, and that's a hard job. Trust me, I know. Working grave shifts in the middle of the night in a crappy part of the city, it's a tough job. Dealing with, domestic violence and just child abuse, horrible things. It's a tough job. But that doesn't make them a gunfighter, and they're not gunfighters. They basically have fire extinguisher guns. Their guns are generally made, get mad if you want, for the lowest common denominator. Many cops get into that because they want a decent job, they want the pension, they want whatever, not because they just love guns. There are some of those cops that go out and shoot competition on the weekends and train on their own. A lot of cops shoot whenever they qual. Every 6 months, every couple of months. Right? That's not a gunfighter. What if I told you I was a runner and you're like, oh, how often do you run? And I'm like, oh, every 6 months. Would you consider me a runner? You think I'm very good at running? And running is not even a real perishable skill. It's just perishable as far as your conditioning goes. Handgun shooting is a perishable skill. So look at common police guns, and the real common one that they have a fire extinguisher gun. They have it on their hip just in case. Is a medium to large frame, and you don't have to know what these terms mean, but K-frame or L-frame police revolver. Medium, let's say 4-inch barrel, and you could go 3, you could go 5, you could go 6, but medium size, 4-inch barrel, mid-frame revolver. They're a lot more forgiving, a lot more pleasant to shoot, a lot easier to aim than a little teeny tiny snub-nosed baby concealed carry revolver. So I would advise you, if you're going to get a handgun, get that for a new shooter. I'm not saying that revolvers are better than semi-autos. This is not that episode. This is not, you want to be the next John Wick. This is fire extinguisher guns. Somebody's going to have one. Maybe they don't even keep it loaded. They keep it locked up somewhere in their house. If there is civil unrest, they want it just in case. They are going to go to the range. They are going to shoot it a little bit. They're going to be competent with it, but they're not going to go out to the range every weekend. Right? Revolvers, you don't have to worry about magazines. You don't have to worry about loading the magazine. And most modern police revolvers that I'm talking about, they're double single action. And for a shooter like this, I wouldn't even worry about the single action, right? But you load up the cylinder, you close the cylinder, you pull the trigger until it stops discharging, then you empty the cylinder and load it again. Revolvers are not simple internally, they're very complex, but as far as the end user goes, they're very simple. Which again, cops use these in America for the better part of the 20th century. And the good thing is they don't use them as much anymore, so there are a lot of police trade-ins. You can find a lot of these that are a little bit beat up. You can find cheaper copies of these made today that they work okay. I'm not a big fan of Taurus, but my recommendation for this application, because it's probably not going to get shot a lot, probably not going to fall apart in your hands, is get a really good, well-made, but older and beat up, because it was carried a lot, police trade-in revolver, or get a Taurus copy of that, a Taurus mid-size, and I'm going to say 38 special. Don't even bother with 357 Magnum. Don't need it for this application. If you get a gun that shoots 357, just shoot 38 specials in it. But just some mid-size revolver, load it with 158 grain or 147 grain, just not even a plus P, just a plain vanilla load. Keep a box or two of that, train with it a little bit, but a mid-frame 38 special revolver. Again, it's just because we have more stuff today doesn't mean that it won't put people in the dirt. Again, cops use that here in America for the better part of the 20th century. When I became a cop, and I'm not that old, there were still guys kicking around, even LAPD, with a wheel gun. Right? It's still a viable option. It's still got a reasonable rate of fire. Now, you got 6 rounds instead of, a more modern gun, 17, 18 rounds. But for most things, for especially not gun people where they're not, it's, again, in case of emergency, it's a fire extinguisher gun. That's going to be my number one recommendation. Again, remember what I said about handguns, but some people, just because it's smaller, they don't want a big gun in the house. They think it's harder to put it somewhere safely or something. And all these guns are super simple to make safe if you have kids or something. Just most guns, I think all guns by law have to come with one. They come with some kind of chain lock where you literally just lock the gun up. You put a chain through the action, or you put a trigger lock in there, and I don't care how big or small the gun is, if you can't fire it, it's not dangerous. Not any more dangerous than a baseball bat. But anyway, some people are less intimidated by handguns, even though they're less effective and harder to use. If the person wants a handgun and that's all they're acceptable to them, they just want a handgun because it's small, and I see this a lot. I see it enough to know it's a thing, so I'm not going to try and fight it. I'm not going to try and live in some unicorn rainbow utopia. I'm going to try and live in the real world. And some people are just interested in getting a handgun. That's my number one recommendation, a mid-size .38 Special. My second recommendation is also pretty user-friendly. And that's probably going to be a lot of the next iteration of police handguns here in America. Again, a lot of cops carry these, break glass in case of emergency. And that's going to be double single actions. A lot of these were your Beretta 92s. A lot of these were your SIG 229s, 226s. I carried a 220. I carried a Beretta 92 in the war, and I carried a SIG 226 or 229 rather as a cop for quite a while. You can still get some of these police trade-in. You can still find them. And some of these, because they didn't even trust the cops with double single action, were converted to double action only. And they're not as desirable because, in my opinion, they're a really bad choice. The double action of the DAK, you talk about lowest common denominator. You want to make sure you're going to pull that trigger. And you can still, obviously, have an accidental discharge with any gun. But you really got to be doing something to have an ND with a double action only. And without getting into what that means, it means that every trigger pull is a long, heavy double action trigger pull. Is it great for USPSA? No. Is it great for running a plate rack? No. Is it great for doing a Mozambique drill super fast? No. But remember what this episode is for. If you can find a converted one of those guns double action only, you don't even have to know what that is. Just ask a buddy of yours that's into guns. Find me one of these police trade-ins. Probably very affordable. I've seen them recently for very affordable prices. They're still very well made, but you do have to worry about loading the magazine. Not worry about it, but you have to know how to load a magazine, which if you drive a car every day, you're probably competent to load a magazine. You load it in the gun, you rack the slide, you pull the trigger, and again, they're either double single, meaning the first one is long and heavy, and the ones after that are lighter. Talking the Beretta 92, the SIG 226, or they've been converted to single action only, or I'm sorry, they're converted to double action only, meaning every trigger pull is long and heavy. But again, for somebody that's not a gun person, for a break glass in case of emergency, that's probably a good thing. And if there is a period of civil unrest and they are going to carry it, not all the time, but they're going to carry it in a really big emergency, probably don't want them having a really light trigger and carrying that. So probably not practicing their draw. They're probably not practicing all the things. So it's a good choice for that. And again, it served police officers for decades. Not as long, because there was kind of this period where we went from that to this transitional period to the striker-fired guns. And I'm not going to get into that. If that's over your head, don't worry about it. Just look at what I'm telling you, the older police trade-in, either Beretta 92s or SIG 226s. And these are just legendarily reliable guns. Also easy to maintain, easy to work on, which is a big advantage. So that would be my second recommendation. Also, there is a newer gun that's kind of in this genre. It's a little bit smaller. It's going to have a little bit more recoil, but it is the Sky. They're American-made SCCY. They're very affordable. They are very reliable. They have a long but smooth double action pull. They make a newer one that's a striker fire. I would say don't get that one. Get the old original double action only. Long, heavy trigger pull. Okay, you're not trying to go fast with this. In fact, I would advise you not trying to go fast if you're a new shooter. If you're a break glass in case of emergency person. If you get a gun and you decide, again, that you really like guns and you want to get into it, I don't think you'd regret having something like this. But this is not the gun for that. This is a break glass in case of emergency fire extinguisher gun. So the Sky is kind of a modern version of that. A little bit smaller, but they're affordable. They're available. If you don't want to worry about the older trade-in ones, some people have a thing about buying used guns, but those guns were meant to go for generations. So I wouldn't have any problem buying a used one. But if you just want a new gun, you don't like buying used, the Skies, they're affordable. Again, that's SCCY. They're 9mm. I would get the 9mm, not the 380. Get the 9mm double action only version. They're about as simple as you can make a gun like that. They are very simple. In my experience, and I've had a lot of those, very reliable. When my sister needed a handgun, that's what she has. She's not a gun, and she was in the military, but she's just not a gun person. Not everybody in the military is a gun person either. There's a lot of jobs in the military that aren't door kickers, that aren't urban warfare people or infantry. So, anyway, 9mm double action only Sky SCCY. There are some other ones like that, but they're generally smaller even than that. And the smaller you get, the more recoil you're going to get in a given caliber in general. So that's another recommendation that I would give you. The next one, because some people are just like, I want a Glock because Glock, and everybody Glock, and Glock Kool-Aid, and I've drank the Glock Kool-Aid, and I hear everywhere, everybody says Glock all the time, Glock, perfection, bleh. So, okay, my next recommendation, if you can't tell, I haven't drank the Glock Kool-Aid. I carried a Glock on duty. I've trusted my life to Glock. I carried one as a private contractor because that's what we had to carry. But this is not my first or second recommendation. But if you want a Glock, here's what I'm going to tell you. Get a full-size Glock 9mm. And I would say a Glock 17. That was the original Glock. I still think it's probably the best all-around Glock. Get the Glock 17. Full-size, double-stack 9mm. If you live in a free state, even if not, just get it and get the 10-round magazines. It's still going to be better. Do not, for somebody in this category, not for you if you want to have a concealed carry gun and you're going to train with it, but for this and for a new shooter and for an all-around handgun, do not get a Glock 43. Do not get a Glock 19. Do not get a Glock 43X. Do not get a Glock 42. Don't get a little uber small or even mid-size. Why? Get a full-size gun. A lot of people do this, especially females. They see a small gun and they think in their head they're less intimidated by a small gun. But a smaller handgun is harder to shoot. For a given caliber, it has more recoil. It's harder to manipulate. It's harder to fix malfunctions. It's harder in almost every way. And again, this is not concealed carry, right? This person, if they're break glass in case of emergency, they probably shouldn't be carrying it in the front of their pants. This is not for that. This is not that episode, so calm down. I'm not saying the 43X is a bad gun, but I'm telling you, for this, get a full-size Glock 17. If you're going to get a Glock, if you want Glock, or the person that's going to help you, that's all they know is Glock, because that's some people, like, that's all they own is Glocks, and that's the only pistol they know how to work. So if that's what you have to work with, you know, if you want a plastic striker-fired pistol made for the lowest common denominator, get the Glock 17. It's kind of the standard. And it's not even my favorite polymer striker-fired pistol. But I don't recommend polymer striker-fired pistols either for an advanced shooter for other reasons or for a new shooter for a lot of reasons. But if you're going to get one, you might as well get a Glock because that's the standard. And you're not going to be good enough to know the difference in grip angles and this thing and that thing. Get the Glock 17, the original Glock. And I'm not saying you have to get like one of the old 80s ones, but I'm saying the Glock 17, I don't care what generation, to you it probably doesn't matter. If you can find one used, now they last a long time, so don't worry about it if you want to save some money. But a Glock 17, full size, 9mm, again, just plain vanilla ammo. If you're going to use it for defense, get hollow points, if you can have them legally where you live, but you know, don't worry about plus P, don't worry about the next coolest hot whiz bang ammo. Look for a good proven defensive round. But full-size Glock 17. And that's, again, not even my first or second choice. But if you want to get that category of plastic, polymer, striker-fired Glock handgun, get a full-size. Don't get a small one. Don't get a 43. I don't care who tells you it's a great gun. It's not for this. I don't care what Johnny Tactical, I don't think that's a real person on YouTube. So if it is, my bad. I'm trying to make up a name. I don't care what Johnny Tactical on YouTube says is the coolest new hot gun. That's not what we're going for here. The Glock 17 is going to be far more pleasant to shoot and train with and easier to fix malfunctions than a Glock 43, which is a really small version of a Glock in the same caliber. More pleasant to shoot, easier to explain on. It's just a better gun for this. The next one I'm going to say may shock some people, but if you want a gun, the person wants a gun for like home defense, apocalypse, like they're not going to be they're going to go, because this requires some training, but they're going to go, they're going to shoot, they're going to go to the range, you're going to be familiar with it, but they're not going to shoot it all the time. Probably not what you're thinking. AK-47. The AK-47. Not the AR-15. Not America's rifle. Not the AR. The AK-47. Here's why. Let's talk about philosophy for a little bit. The M16, AR-15 derivative family, that was made for professional soldiers, professional Marines, people that train with that. They assemble it, they disassemble it, they know how to maintain it. They go to the range a lot. They train fairly regularly. They get quite a bit of basic training on the gun. Okay, that, and if you're that person, the AR-15 makes a lot of sense. This is not that episode again. I'm not saying it's a better gun than the AR-15. The AK-47 was made for conscript soldiers, for peasants, for untrained, not gun people. Now, gun people can certainly use it, and they'll certainly be better with it than non-gun people. If you train with it, you'll certainly be better with somebody that doesn't train with it. But it was made for a peasant army. It was made for a conscript army. Like, oh, hey, we're losing people. Guess what? You're in the army now. Sally forth and get shot in the face. That's who the AK-47 was made for. Conscripts. Like, minimum training to be effective. Like, here's the gun. Here's a basic down and dirty how it works. I mean, I'm going to say as little maintenance as you can give a gun and it still be working. There are guns kicking around in Africa that may have never seen any maintenance, that are decades old, that are still working, that not only work, but they're getting used by like child soldiers, like 12-year-olds. And that's not a good thing. I'm not saying that's a good thing. Calm down. What I'm saying is that shows you that it's a really simple gun to use, which is in keeping with today's episode. I think far better, because that's what it was designed for, right? You might think it's easy if you were in the army or you train a lot or you were
in 1,000 feet, continue straight.
Right? If you were a cop and, or military, it might seem simple to you that, oh, this is the
continue straight to stay on.
It may be simple to you that, oh, this is the selector switch.
Continue on US.
It might seem simple to you that, oh, this is a selector switch, this is your safety, this is your magazine release, and this is your charging handle and all that stuff. But not to a not gun person, not to somebody that's going to have it and maybe train with it and then forget about it for a year. You look at the AK-47, the safety is a giant thing on the side. It's got a big rock and lock-in magazine, which is not as fast, but you're probably not going to hit the wrong button and drop the magazine out on the ground, which you can do with an AR-15 if you're not familiar with it, right? We're talking about break glass in case of emergency fire extinguisher gun. It's got very simple, but obviously combat effective sights, right? History, can't argue with history. It's very combat effective. It's got a decent combat effective round, but the recoil is not crazy. So it's, again, there's 12-year-olds running around using it, and that's not good, but it shows you that it can be used by less than the ideal soldier. It's got a big giant lever on the side for a safety. It's got a big giant handle that even if you're not a gun person, but you know how machines work, you kind of look at it and you're like, oh, I grab that thing and pull it. Again, super simple. You got a post in the front, you got a notch in the back. You have somebody draw you a crude sight picture once, explain it to you. I wouldn't even try to put an optic on it. You just get a basic AK-47. And if you want it's simple. It was made to be simple. It was made for them too, but it wasn't just made for professional standing armies, well-trained. It was made for conscript soldiers, made to arm mass numbers of the general population when needed. And that's kind of in keeping with today's episode. And I'm not saying that it's a better rifle than the AR-15, so settle down. I'm not saying it's better than the Scar 17. I'm saying for somebody that's not going to train a lot, but they want a rifle, they want it's not going to be, fully automatic. It's going to be select fire, but just about as simple as you can have a decent amount of firepower in an intermediate rifle, semi-automatic. It's about as simple as you can get. And I thought about the SKS, but I think as far as the SKS I like better for a lot of things, and I've talked about that, especially for crossover hunting and like go-to survival rifle. But that's not this episode. Break glass in case of emergency gun. Maybe you live in the city and you might have to deal with a fair number of people. You remember the LA riots and like the store owners on top of their stores with AK-47s. So, that shows you that it can be used in a civil unrest period to keep the peace. Even by those guys probably weren't out on the weekends, I don't know, but doing, door kicking, room clearing drills, right? That they probably weren't eating and breathing that. They were store owners. They were clerks. And they, I think rightfully so, stood up to protect themselves and their community when the time came. If you're in that category, you might look at the AK-47. Forget about the negative connotations, right? It's a rifle. It's not malum in se. It's not evil by nature. It's a piece of metal. Springs and bolts and levers. It's no more good or evil than your Honda Civic or whatever you drive. If you're not a gun person, I don't know what you drive. But probably it's no more good or evil than that. So the AK-47, kind of very much in keeping with this episode. If you want a little bit more firepower and you want it simple to operate, simple to maintain, simple to use, then there you go. And again, not an exhaustive list, but that I think covers pretty much every category that you might want if you're looking for a good fire extinguisher gun. Break glass in case of emergency. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm not even going to push Patreon or anything on this episode. If you did enjoy this show, and you're not a normal listener, but you thought, you know what, that was some good info. That was some good intel. Maybe scroll down, hit some stars, like and subscribe. And if you normally listen to this episode and you haven't done that, obviously do that. At least do that. Leave a review. But if you listen to this episode and you're nodding your head and you have somebody in your life like that, and as Jesus says, I was reading that passage this morning in my normal Bible study this morning, no prophet has honor in his own country. Right? When Jesus preached in his own hometown, they tried to throw him off a cliff. So I'm not saying that you don't have the knowledge, but what I'm saying is just because of the dynamic, it's often easier to have somebody else teach or talk to somebody close to you. So, instead of trying to pee up a rope, for lack of a better term, you're just going to make a mess and not get anywhere, have somebody else, like share this episode. If you have somebody in your life that's not completely turned off to guns, but maybe they just don't want to listen to you because they're especially if it's a man talking to another man, they don't want to look ignorant. Share this with them. Say, hey, this guy seems to know what he's talking about. He's in the military, law enforcement, whatever you think is going to push their buttons. And have them listen and say, this guy is recommending these. Here's an episode you might enjoy. So share this with somebody. If you have somebody in your life, please share it with them if you think that they should have a gun, or maybe time to move up to a different kind of gun. If you think that they want or are willing to have a gun in case of an emergency. They're not going to be a gun person. They're not going to be, wearing the body armor and kicking doors and going to force training and all that stuff. And that's not bad, but they're just not that person. But you still think, and you think they might be open to having a gun. Share this episode with them. There's a little icon, a little square with an arrow. Click on that and it'll usually give you some options. Text it to them, whatever. Email it to them. I don't care. But send it to them. What's the worst they can do? Not listen to it. It's not like you're asking them to do push-ups, right? So, anyway, I'd appreciate that. Thanks for listening. Tactical tip of the day. If you're in this category or getting a gun for somebody in this category and helping them, gun maintenance, I'm going to recommend you get just a bottle of CLP. It's kind of an all-around what the military uses. I'm not saying it's the best all the time, but for this, it's a pretty good one-and-done option. CLP. Cleaning, lubricating, and protecting. Get just a little bit of CLP and a bore snake. If somebody is not really into guns, you'll probably do more harm than good trying to shove a cleaning rod, because they might do it the wrong way, shoving it from the muzzle end in the gun or something. Don't even bother with that. They're probably not going to shoot enough rounds to it to ever need that. And if they do, you bring it to somebody that knows what they're doing. Pay a gun store or gun shop a few bucks to clean it if you've had it for a couple of years and you want to give it a better cleaning. But just get a bore snake. It basically looks like a big thick piece of string that you pull through the bore. It's got little bristles on the front, and you pull it through. It's real easy. It's got a weight on one end. You drop it down the barrel and you pull it through, and you can just add a little bit of CLP to the front of it, not on the back of it, and pull it through. maybe pull it through once or twice. And, with that and an old toothbrush that you've, washed all your funk out of, but an old toothbrush and some CLP, you're probably fine with the gun maintenance on the guns we've talked about today. We're not talking about anything crazy that needs a lot of maintenance. So bore snake and CLP, and you probably have an old toothbrush kicking around. So that's your tactical tip of the day. Bore snake, old toothbrush, CLP. You're probably into all that $20 maybe. So anyway, that's your tactical tip. In keeping with today's episode, I usually do that if you guys are a first time listener to this, and I usually do a tactical verse of the day. And likely I'll mention several verses throughout the course of an episode, but one in keeping with today is, "You shall do no injustice in judgment in measurements of length, weight, or volume." You have honest scales, honest weights, an honest ephon, and honest tin. Try and be honest and sober in your judgments, right? I'm not telling you to get any of this stuff because I'm getting paid by whomever, right? I don't know, the next Turkish gun importer that's telling you this gun's great. This gun's brand new. You got to buy this. If you don't buy it, you're missing out. Give in to the FOMO. Right? That's not what you get here. I'm trying to give you honest, straight, unbiased opinion. And I think that's important. Anyway. "You shall do no injustice in judgment in measurements of length, weight, or volume. You shall have honest scales, honest weights, an honest ephah, and an honest tin." Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.